Here we are in Ways and Means, continuing our work on our miscellaneous tax bill. And Kirby Keaton is going to take us through it. And there's a section by section.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
I may sound different because I thought in January and December I had contracted every virus known to science, but there was one out there that found me.
Oh, God. Kirby.
Yeah. We don't know yet if Pat gave it to me, but he denies it. For the record. Would the chair like me to go through the entire miscellaneous tax bill or start with decoupling?
Let's start with decoupling and then we'll go through the whole thing just in the interest of our brains.
That means we start on page 55 or page 38, I'm sorry, section 55. And specifically for changes, we start on page 39, line 6. And we'll start by looking at the definitions for taxable income for corporations, or Vermont net income rather is the term used for corporate income tax. So we're starting with the corporate income tax definitions. And on line 6, this is nothing new, but this is the provision decoupling from the bonus depreciation for qualified production property. Nothing that I go over should be new to you. It should all be things that Pat had just touched on. So as a refresher, part of the proposal here is to decouple from the changes allowing bonus depreciation on qualified production property from HR 1. Vermont previously had already decoupled from bonus depreciation for certain business personal property. Those two were lumped together in this new language, this new provision. And if you remember from the last time I walked through this, we also added some language from the Department of Taxes dealing with the administration of when Vermont decouples from bonus depreciation to help taxpayers know the exact steps that are expected to go through. And we'll be going over that with you in a second. So that's your lines 6 through 8. And then we have some extra language here relating to the deductions for domestic research and experimental procedures. Previously, when I showed you this language, it was to have Vermont fully decouple and not allow those deductions in Vermont at all. Some significant changes have taken place for this language. And as Pat said, for what Vermont law will be treating as small businesses, they'll be able to follow the full HR 1 treatment, which means those small businesses will be able to fully expense their domestic research and experimental procedures in the year that those expenses are incurred, just like HR 1 allows. But for larger businesses, they'll have to amortize those expenses over 5 years, which is the pre-HR 1 treatment. But there's no, in no case will a business or a taxpayer not be allowed to take those deductions at all. So pretty big difference from before, the language from before. So getting into it, you'll see for corporate taxpayers, it says for any taxpayer that does not qualify as an eligible taxpayer, that is the terminology we're using. This is where I stop and say, there was significant help from John Gordakowski, the Department of Taxes. So shout out to John for being incredibly helpful.
I just like, since you said it, I just like to say, like, whether, you know, the tax department can speak to their view on the full bill, but the level of cooperation and collaboration from a technical perspective with both attorneys and fiscal staff has been like such a gift this last month.
So yeah, so a lot of this language that we'll be looking at was suggested by John, including, you know, setting this up as using the term eligible taxpayer. And then we define eligible taxpayer with a reference to the federal code at section 448. So that you understand this, though, Pat went over it, but so eligible taxpayer is going to mean a taxpayer with average gross receipts of the entity for the 3 taxable years preceding the current year. And if those average gross receipts over that 3-year period does not exceed 25 million is what federal law says, but it's adjusted for inflation, so it's actually 31 million. So if those gross receipts over that 3-year period preceding do not exceed 31 million, they'll be considered a small business or an eligible taxpayer under this. And they'll be able to basically have the same treatment as at the federal level to fully expense. And if a taxpayer for the current year does not meet that, we'll go into what happens. So that's what's being set out here. I'm going to skip down so we can see the follow-up. We were just looking at the decoupling as far as things that have to be added back. Now we're going to jump ahead to the deductions that Vermont will allow. So things that can be taken out of income. So there's 3 scenarios that the language is dealing with after that basic rule that I just went over. The first scenario is for the larger businesses. What do they do? So this Roman numeral large V, large 5 here, this language is saying that for domestic research and experimental procedures, the businesses that don't meet that 31 million in gross receipts test, they'll have to amortize for 5 years those expenses. They'll still get to take them, but they'll just have to be across 5 years. And the way that we get at that is that if you want to get another way to put it or to get more technical about it is we're conforming statically to December 31, 2024 federal law for that. So by doing that, we're bringing in that 5-year amortization.
Page 41.
Yes. You'll find versions of the same language in 3 different places. We're looking at corporate now. We have it also for individuals and then for estates and trusts. Page 41 is the corporate language. Okay, so that's the first scenario. The second scenario in Roman numeral 6 is what do we do about tax years 22 through 24 when it comes to the eligible taxpayers? Because under previous federal law, they were to amortize over 5 years, and they'll still have some expenses that are moving forward. So the way that this language deals with that scenario is it allows that amortization to proceed like it was under HR 1. It does not allow full expensing for those years so that the next tax year, the current tax year, doesn't get hit with all those expenses. They're still going to be amortized over 5 years, like the HR 1 treatment for those taxpayers for that time period. So that's what's happening in 6. And then in 7, it deals with the scenario of what happens when a larger taxpayer, or in the terminology we're using here, one that's not an eligible taxpayer, becomes an eligible taxpayer, has their gross receipts drop, and then all of a sudden they become an eligible taxpayer. In that case, we have language dealing with that scenario here that allows those taxpayers to continue to amortize from when they were a larger business, right? Like they were before. In other words, if we had no language here, there's an interpretation where they would no longer get to amortize because they're now ineligible taxpayers that don't do that. So this language clarifies, yes, continue to amortize what the expenses you had from before, but you can start full expensing for any current year expenses now. So that's what this language in 7 means. And, I understand it's really dense, but, that is what all of that means, all of those references.
Go back to 6 for a second.
Yes.
I'm trying to think if you qualify as an eligible taxpayer, less than $31 million in revenue, and you've amortized 4 years of your capital expenses, that ordinarily would be maybe 39 years in an amortization schedule. So you're saying you can't deduct more than what you've already deducted in the past.
Yeah, there's language here for that too, to make sure that because we're dealing with these different scenarios, we have the extra language to make sure that there's no taxpayer that ends up
Double dipping.
expensing more than they actually spent.
Yeah, okay.
So we're extra clear about that.
Just trying to which the language there.
Yeah. Okay. Simple. Yeah. Just a few pages of undecipherable language. So we'll go back up to the other things as a reminder. Nothing's changed, but from the last time I walked through this, for corporate income tax, on line 16 of page 39, you'll see the language that is decoupling Vermont from those federal deductions that are for foreign sourced income. I think as Pat mentioned, but also as a reminder, the idea here is that those deductions exist to help do allocation and apportionment between foreign and the US. The logic is that Vermont already does apportionment, so allowing these deductions basically has that income apportioned twice or reduced down twice. So that doesn't happen with this decoupling. And I think also Pat said, this is not a direct response to what happened in HR 1. It's just related. So then you have on page 40, starting at line 11, where we put in the language spelling out what happens in Vermont for cases of bonus depreciation. And in a nutshell, this language allows the taxpayer to do normal depreciation, to do depreciation on that property as if they did not claim bonus depreciation at the federal level. And it also has that additional language we just talked about a second ago, that preventing a taxpayer from using this different treatment to expense more than they actually spent in the first place. This is for the 168K bonus depreciation. This is not new, although we did talk about how the department had wanted this extra language because it wasn't spelled out in the law before. So it's really helpful for them when there's a disagreement with the taxpayer, say, about how to do it. We're going to have that treatment in statute. And then subsection N is the qualified deduction property, which is the new thing out of HR 1 that we're decoupling from. So those two are together for this language. And those are the changes when it comes to the corporate income tax. So next we'll get into individual.
Does anyone need a? Okay.
Right. So on page 43, line 13, you have the same decoupling from both types of bonus depreciation that Vermont would be decoupling from. Same thing as before. Starting on line 19, this is the domestic research and experimental procedures. Same exact treatment, except there is, if you look closely at the language, there is a little bit there about including any amount of these deductions carried over on the taxpayer's federal income tax return as part of a net operating loss from the prior year. You have to address net operating losses when it comes to individuals and estates and trusts, because under corporate income tax, Vermont does not allow a net operating loss to carry forward. So we didn't have to address that. Since it can be carried forward for an individual, we're addressing that scenario. Otherwise, the language is the same. The same eligible taxpayer terminology is used to differentiate between the quote unquote small businesses and the larger ones. And the same gross receipts test used for personal income taxes. We also have on line 7 here, the decoupling from the federal exclusion for qualified small business stock. That was something that we did not have to put in the corporate definitions because this exclusion is not allowed for corporations at the federal level, but it is allowed for individuals and estates and trusts. So you'll see that the decoupling language is in the definitions for personal income tax. So we have the same explanation for the treatment for bonus depreciation at the bottom of page 45 and on to 46. And then we have the same language for domestic research and experimental. Starting at line 16, going down, same thing that we just went over for corporate. And then starting on page 48, line 15, are the definitions for estates and trusts. And it's the same as the individuals. We have the bonus depreciation decoupling. We have the domestic research and experimental procedures decoupling, and the small business stock, qualified small business stock decoupling. And also the same language spelling out how bonus depreciation decoupling works and spelling out how the domestic research and experimental procedures decoupling works. Section 56 is not new, but this is the language that the department, I believe, had asked for. Yes, having to do with personal income tax apportionment for Vermont. The statute that we have now for apportionment is dated, and we had talked about how the language for apportionment for corporate income tax is newer because of the more recent reforms. And so under corporate income tax, you determine the which one is it that we determine tax first for? Under corporate income tax, you determine the income of the entire taxpayer, and then you apportion it down, and then you apply tax. And that works out pretty logically. The way that the way that our apportionment works for personal income tax right now is that it determines tax first, and then it tries to apportion it out based on AGI, but that means our apportionment's not taking all of the decoupling into account. So this new language makes sure the decoupling is taken into account so that basically the amount of tax that's due for a taxpayer is getting the same treatment related to decoupling when you have a tax return that involves income that's Vermont income and also income from other places, as you would if the income was all Vermont income. Without these changes, the current state of things is the department can run into situations where, especially if a taxpayer's going to benefit by not taking the decoupling into account when it comes to apportioning their personal income tax, they can push back and say, hey, follow the statute. I don't know as much tax as you say I do. And there's not a lot they can do about it because the statute's pretty plain about that. So what this does is it corrects that problem.
Or like a K1 statement. Coming in. An individual has a K1 statement for income and a sub-S corporation that is able to now reduce their income because of these new,
There's a bunch of different scenarios. Like any of the things that we decouple from, an individual could have. And remember, the decoupling goes both ways. There are certain things Vermont can't tax, such as federal bond income. This apportionment doesn't take that into account either. So you could have a scenario where a person has a whole lot of federal bond income, and our statute's not taking that into account. So when we do apportionment, we say, you had $10,000 of rental income from Vermont, from this property you own here. That's the only Vermont income you had. But we look at how much money you made, and you owe us $15,000 in tax because basically we're indirectly taxing that bond income. So it goes both ways as far as it could increase or decrease how much is owed, but it's out of sync with, the intention in the law for how Vermont intends to tax things, right? Yeah. Okay, so section 57. Is also part of the apportionment clarification. And section 58 is the increase to the research and development tax credit that Pat talked about. Section 59 is the increase to the downtown and village center tax credit maximum award amount, going from a total of 3 million in annual awards to 5.
so that should be 4.
Let's talk about this.
Carol wanted another one.
Has that changed?
Sure.
That haven't been around?
Right.
Carol. Speaking of that.
And then sections 60 and 61 are the link up to December 31, 2025. So everything out of HR 1 that flows through to Vermont that you have not seen decoupling from in the language we were just looking at, this link up language would have Vermont coupled to. And then I'll go to effective dates. So as of right now, the effective dates has the decoupling stuff and the link up retroactive to January 1, 2025. So there's no gap in treatment. And the language has the increase to the Vermont Research and Development Tax Credit as January 1, 2027. So that would be starting next year. And that's the income tax stuff.
Very excited about it.
Yeah. Defaults up there.
Thought I was at least saying that.
Symptom of your virus.
Yes. Do we want to go back and go through the rest of miscellaneous tax now?
I do, yes, we can, thank you.
I think Micah Brady will,
We have 11 to do that part,
okay, so I'll,
so if you want to do the parts that are them.
to help him with his time, wherever I'm at, I'll just plan to switch over.
So, yeah.
So as a reminder, until now, we've been looking at the corporate changes, the decoupling stuff separately. So just so that everyone's clear, It's in the miscellaneous tax bill now. That's what we've been looking at. We're gonna go back to the beginning of the miscellaneous tax.
Remember, there's a section by section for anyone who. wants
There is, and we're at draft 5.1. So the section by section should also say 5.1. Okay, so a lot of the stuff that I'll go through right now at the beginning were the requests from Department of Taxes. First one was to repeal Vermont's statute denying tax credits for S corporations. Since we've gone through this 2 or 3 times now, I won't dwell too much unless you ask me to. Section 2 is the change to the property transfer tax, expressly giving the department some more authority to investigate transactions that look like they may be attempts to use a loophole to get around paying the higher rate that was put into effect for second homes. Sections 3 and 4 are those changes relating to PBR conducting evaluation for unenrolled parcels from current use in order to speed up the timeline for taxpayers to know how much land use change tax they might owe. The current use provisions or change relating to grazing rights has been removed here.
No, folks, remember, we like, is that, okay, great, thanks. I'm not gonna actually have to do that.
So that's why there's no section 4, we're just not section 5.
There's a section 4, I renumbered. That's why I put in the note that it was removed, because there's no other indicator. It's also why you should use the most up-to-date section by section, because there's been renumbering. Section 5 is the change the calculations for the municipal grand list stabilization program so that it uses the same calculation process using the previous year tax rates, like what we did for pilot. Section 6 adds provisions addressing cases where communication service provider fails to submit an inventory to PBR. PBR is taking over the valuation of that property. Section 7 relates to the equalization study, and it clarifies that the treatment of CHIP sites is the same as TIF districts for purposes of the equalization study. Section 8 also relates to the equalization study. It's for purposes of the equalization study, it requires PBR to use a 100% CLA for determining tax rates for municipalities that just completed a master reappraisal. Sections 9 and 10 extend the health IT fund sunset for 5 years. Section 11, 12, 13, 14 are the updates to the inflators for education finance provisions. Section 15 is the request from the taxpayer advocate to, in cases where there's legal separation or divorce, that the property tax credit will be calculated using 100% of the property value instead of being split up for those people. Section 16 is the change for the estate tax to make sure that the filing threshold lines up with the same threshold as having a tax liability.
I'm just gonna pause here for 1 second because we left this outstanding last time, but I think it was just because I wanted to. Everyone else was okay with it, right?
It's just
Okay.
the fine.
Great, okay. Great, onwards.
Onwards.
I've accepted it now. Glad we could all do that with me. Thank you.
Section 17 is the change to down payment assistance that Pat went over earlier. This increases the award amount to 350,000 for the year, and also extends this program to 2031. Sections 18 and 19 preclude Vermont from participating in the new federal tax credit program for contributions to scholarship granting organizations.
Representative,
We really haven't talked about this
Haven't.
very much, and so can we talk about it now?
yeah, that makes sense. Except Mike's gonna walk in 5 minutes.
I can do it in
Let's come-
5 minutes.
Okay. So I would like to narrow this language, I think, to have it less be about prohibiting and more about like, if we're gonna participate in a tax benefit program, the governor needs to get the approval of the legislature.
Say the last part again, please.
So I would like to narrow this slightly to have it say that if we're going to participate in any federal tax benefit program of any kind, the administration needs to get the approval of the legislature, just like we would do with anything else.
Like what?
We have like a bunch of provisions that for like any fees or taxes or anything, that's like how we do our fiscal policy. Yeah, it's just separation of powers. Yeah.
It's like taxing.
It's like all the things, yeah. No, thank you. I was having trouble finding an example and I was like, all the examples, yeah. Yes. Yeah, no, totally.
So again,
Yeah.
I really wouldn't approve of that, but
Yeah.
but again, I think it's important for people to understand what the program is. I
Mm-hmm.
did some investigation to find out.
Mhm.
And it is, used to qualify for qualified elementary and secondary education expenses. I think it's important to go over what those might be: tuition, mandatory school fields, books, supplies, academic tutoring and services for students with disabilities, computers, technology, hardware, school provided services, room and board, uniforms, transportation, whatever it might be. Supplemental programs such as extended day or after school enrichment programs. Key provisions are the program covers expenses of public, private, and religious K through 12. In case people don't realize that. Effective dates are the credit donation begins in the 2027 tax year. It's for a refundable federal tax credit up to $1,700 annually for cash contributions to the qualified scholarship granting organizations. I found out what those are, say in a minute. The eligibility for scholarships are generally restricted to students from households earning at or below 300% of the area's median gross income. Again, SGOs are organizations, 501(c)(3)s, such as Vermont Student Assistance Corporation, the Curtis Fund, Vermont Community Foundation, Vermont Association for Education of Young Children, and Vermont Catholic Community Foundation, to name a few.
Everything you said was my understanding as well, except for that last part, because I don't think any SGOs have actually been selected in Vermont yet, so
So yeah, I think fair. Has to be a 501(c)(3). I don't know how VSAC is structured, but I would want to look into whether, for instance, they would qualify under the federal language. Because SGO is defined under the federal language as a 501(c)(3) that follows all of these requirements under this new law, it's hard to say that any exist yet because, like, why would they exist? You know what I mean? Because they'll be created for the purposes of this, if that makes sense. So I think that's an open question about what would or wouldn't be an SGO. I did receive some questions in the Senate about how hard would it be to set one of these up. My guess from the legal side is a person with experience in setting up nonprofits could probably set one of these up pretty easily. It wouldn't be as much as, doing it all in a day, but it could be pretty quick, I think. But you would set it up in a way and then manage it in a way that you make sure you follow all the federal requirements, because you need to do that in order for the credits to work.
Well, I appreciate that regardless.
Yeah, totally.
My opinion is from many of my constituents that certainly support school choice. I mean, myself, we at one point had our daughters in the same grade every other year, which didn't work out, and we chose to send them to St. Paul's School on our own dime and transportation. And a program like this, my understanding is, could possibly help with that. So I don't see any reason why we shouldn't, I think that I heard the comment initially that it kind of goes against what we're trying to accomplish in Act 73. I don't agree with that at all. I think it's totally outside of that, and an opportunity for my constituents that I've talked to have an opportunity to take advantage of some of this federal. So anyway.
I appreciate that. I think for me, like as a basic tax principle, in some ways sort of similar to removing the checkbox yesterday for animal welfare, I think it was. Our taxes pay for education and a lot of those exact items that you named. That's what our taxes are already paying for. So to have sort of tax avoidance or tax credit in order to pay for that strikes me as just sort of an end run around the principles of the tax system. I think we can have I think charity is a fine and great thing. I think the market is a fine thing sometimes. And taxes are a fine thing, but I think when we get them all mixed up with each other, it's hard to have a solid set of tax policy. My secondary concern is just to make sure that the legislature retains its separation of powers and its ability to set tax policy and the others. But and I'm happy to open up this conversation. I think for the purposes of the bill, we can straw poll each section and maybe have differences on certain sections. And then we'll vote the whole bill and people can make their decisions based on it. Yeah. Does anyone else want to add anything? Okay.
Section 20 here has the changes to the definition of parcel that I feel like we've looked at so many times. This is intended to help get data for mapping. And then sections 21 through 23 were drafted by Mike O'Grady, and he plans to stop by and talk about it, so we'll skip that for now. If you walked in right now, that would be perfect, wouldn't it?
It's actually the exact timing, so it's pretty magical agenda wise.
I would just say, and I've said it before, I don't care for this portion.
Thank you. I hear that, yeah. And it's been amended significantly, so we'll
I-
when he comes
yeah, I
back.
know.
Yeah.
So skipping over that for a second, then we have 20-something sections that all relate to moving the grand list to January 1.
The effective date on that will be.
Good question. I'll look at that before I skip ahead. I've also lost track. July 1, 2031, which I believe is intended to line up with the timeline for the RADs that we have.
Still just naming, I don't think that we have to wait that long, but something that.
You can ask Rebecca about it when she sits in the chair.
I'll have a speeded up timeline, just so.
Good thing.
Okay. Section 49 is where we'll jump. Section 49 has, this is one of the requests from the Department of Taxes from the beginning of the session that didn't make it into the miscellaneous tax bill at first, but Becca was so persistent. And it paid off. No, I'm only joking.
No, that's true. That's what happened.
So anyways, these changes, just take out the language that's in statute right now relating to the PBR director having oversight of delinquent taxes, municipal taxes, property taxes. PBR doesn't really do that in practice and did not have an interest in doing that. And so this feels like a vestige of a different government structure that had previously existed. And then in section 50, there are some changes relating to the pilot special fund. Okay, so in section,
You paused as if you were looking for a cue.
you were squinting and I'm like, oh.
No, I'm just like migraine-y.
Oh, okay,
Sorry.
same. Okay, so section 50 changes some expenses related to PBR as coming from either the education fund or general fund over to the pilot special fund. So this particular section takes the $100,000 that's in statute for assessment education and changes the statute so that it comes out of the pilot special fund. Little note here, I had, after discussions with the tax department last summer, I had put this section down as a technical change for the technical corrections bill because it has money coming out of the education fund and statute, but the education fund has a poison pill provision stating that our whole property tax system blows up if you try to take money out of the education fund and it's not allowed. So not because it was necessarily going to blow anything up, but why play around with that?
It never came out of the education fund anyway.
And it wasn't coming out of the education fund anyways. In reality, general fund as part of the department's budget, I think.
Sounds fun.
But now, under this language, it comes from the pilot special fund.
And so this was so the move away from the education fund in statute, not in practice, has always been away from the education fund in practice, was in the technical corrections bill. GovOps does the technical corrections bill. They were like, oh, this is like very weedy. We don't want to touch the education fund and technical corrections bill. So asked us to put it in our bill. This is what we did in budget adjustment already, and this is in the budget already. In an effort to sort of protect our jurisdiction, I pulled it into this bill, but it is in the budget.
It's in the budget,
Indeed, and it was in budget adjustment as you voted for it.
so it's already done.
It already happened once, and the appropriations committee plans to do it again. So we can certainly have a conversation about it. Yes.
So we're talking going forward.
Yes, Bill.
So the local option taxes portion that's sent to the state goes into this pilot special fund, so there's plenty of funds available for this.
And I
After
would,
paying 100% of pilot.
yes, and I would love to wait to have the conversation about the pilot special fund, because I know people have really big feelings about the pilot special fund. It's really one of the things that I've been reflecting on with JFO over the last 2 months is there's this strange thing in the legislature where there's one fund that everyone gets really into every biennium, and this is the fund this biennium. Ted is finalizing his estimates based on the town meeting budgets on the local option tax and is not yet ready to take us through those estimates, and he will be very soon. So I'm going to hold that conversation for now. Sorry. Because I think it'll be a better conversation if we actually have any numbers in front of us.
So the only thing I want to get clear is it's what's happening. So House appropriations made this change for this year's budget. But you are proposing that we make it go for years going forward.
And appropriations is planning on doing it for next budget year too. I'm just proposing that we have it in our language in
You'd
order
rather
to
have it.
protect some jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't disagree with
Okay.
the jurisdictional issue. I
Yes.
disagree with substance.
Okay, and we don't know the substance until we actually look at the numbers from TED, which he will have soon. Representative Wozniak.
Morbid curiosity. When you're talking about the poison pill blowing up, like, what does that actually mean?
It means that the, 16 VSA 4025 has a provision stating that if money is taken out of the education fund for not one of the allowable purposes, then it repeals the property tax.
So we just make everything allowable.
Amazing.
So you have to remember to not withstand or to make it allowable, but this particular statute,
It's irrelevant.
it's written to allow this money to be taken out of the education fund, but it did not directly address the poison pill provision. So let's say, let's be safe and do that. Not a really high risk thing, but the stakes at least are high though.
Could be fun.
The allowable purposes is administration.
If we get bored.
Yeah.
So,
And technically, this is
yeah.
administration of the ed funds. I think it probably would cover it anyway.
So
We get bored in a
I,
couple of weeks.
let's council would ask if
If you get
you,
bored in a couple of weeks, you can blow up the education fund? Is that what you just
No,
said?
there's
Might be
no,
might be an interesting thought experiment.
functionally, there's no poison pill.
Okay,
so anyway, if you decide to do something differently, I will probably come back later and ask that we still do a technical correction somehow. Even if it means just putting a provision into 4025 to make sure that all of the loose ends are met here. Okay, so section 51. Is the actual language for the pilot special fund, and so this section of 51 is just capturing within the pilot statute the three changes that we're making. We already covered one of them, the one from 3436. And the other two we'll cover here in a second. So in 4041A, this is the $850 per parcel fee that is for grand list maintenance and for to pay for mastery appraisals. So the proposal here is to change that from general fund to this pilot special fund for those payments. And then in 53, it is, you probably guessed, the $1 per parcel fee for assistance with the equalization study. So that's why the heading for this is PBR expenses. Those are the PBR expenses being moved to the pilot special fund. Which brings us to section 54, which is some session law, creating a 10-year tax study conducted by the Joint Fiscal Office. I believe Chris has already been over this with you. So I'll skip the details.
does anyone have everyone's good with that?
I would flag that there is a $100,000 appropriation for this, but there's also language here making it contingent upon appropriation, which means if the study doesn't get funded, then JFO doesn't have to do it.
Why would we do that? Just kidding.
I had a, yeah. And this would be our third 10-year tax study. Fourth? Can't stop now, guys.
That brings us to the decoupling stuff that we already went over. So I'll skip ahead. Can avert your eyes. And we're almost done. Section 62 makes some changes to how revenue is deposited into various funds. Section 62 onward, I should say.
These are the graphs that Chris shared on Tuesday? Yesterday. Tuesday.
So section 62, it changes the portion of meals tax revenue, meals and rooms tax revenue that's deposited into the education fund by increasing it by 4%. It goes from 25% of that revenue to 29% of it. And then it also changes the purchase and use tax revenue portion for the ed fund from 1/3 to 27%. I will note that even though there's no language here, this change affects the transportation fund because the spillover from purchase and use tax goes to the transportation fund. So there's no reason to change anything for that. Just note that that is effectively what happens by this. And then Section 63 changes. This is the general fund. So the amount of meals and rooms tax revenue that's deposited in the general fund will go from 69% to 65%. So this should all track the slides that Chris showed you from the other day. And then there's the effective dates. So I'll go through in detail since we're nearing the end here. So what's retroactive to?
So this is the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 in our $104 million distribution?
No,
Okay, could you tell me where that money, what is that? I don't understand this.
It's moving around some revenue to different funds that are supposed to work in tandem to meet some needs in the transportation fund.
so governor recommended that purchase and use tax, some more of the purchase and use tax revenue from the education fund move to the transportation fund, because transportation fund has been have steadily decreasing revenue. Yes. In order to make that not a one-time but a permanent change, instead of moving a dollar amount, we're shifting the statutory percentages. So the transportation fund will permanently get that $10 million until the statute gets changed again, of course. But I'm not planning on changing the statute. And then in order to make sure that the general fund in order to make sure that that change does not increase property taxes, we need to move money from the general fund to the education fund,
Okay.
which was in the governor's recommend as well, but that was also one-time money. And so this is essentially doing that whole thing, but doing it permanently rather than as dollars. It's doing it as percentages.
I do remember.
Okay.
We talked about
Yeah.
that.
Yes, and Chris had a chart that had sort of a pinkish orange bars on it. Sorry, I'm very visual memory. I don't know if that helped anyone else.
Okay, so permanently, we are taking money out of the ed fund and giving it to transportation, or taking money out of purchase and use and giving it to transportation.
Both of those things mean the exact same thing. So yes. Yes.
And are we taking the amount that the governor suggested?
Yes.
So the change in percentage is equivalent to the
Yes,
amount
it's-
of money that the governor wanted, ish.
It's ish. Can we put up that chart from
Say it while we draw it.
Chris? Can you have these words?
Sure, Chris Rook, Joint Fiscal, the governor's proposal, so if you have your computers, my slides were posted under Tuesday's date that you can look at, but I'll just say verbally, the governor proposed a $10 million shift. If we are using whole round numbers to deal with these tax percentages, this results in $9.9 million going to the T fund in FY 27, and then it steadily goes up a little bit with growth, and so it's as close to 10 million as we can reasonably get. And then the ed fund gets sort of backfilled from that loss of purchase and use revenue by getting 4% more of the meals and rooms tax revenue. And that results in a $10.8 million shift. Again, that's as close as we could get to 10 million using whole round percentages. So the ed fund ends up being like $900,000 ahead, which in a $2.5 billion fund is essentially net neutral. But this way, it's not just a one-off shift in FY 27, as the chair mentioned. This is an ongoing shift of $10 million, and property taxes are you know, for lack of a better term, being held harmless as a result of all this.
Ah,
Yes.
Well, not good.
say it's like a pinkish orange.
Welcome.
It's the best thing you did all day, Kirby. It was a joke. We're all so thrilled that he pulled up a slide. He's done all this other really hard work today.
Any sick?
So any other questions about that? Yes.
So I'm curious how much help this provides to the transportation fund in terms of the larger structural problem the transportation fund has, but that doesn't feel like a question for this
I
moment.
feel like it's not a question for this moment, but it's a great question. There's still,
I think we should do it.
there's still much problem to solve, but this is what we can.
And that was
do
just
this
kind of
year.
the point that I wanted to get.
There's still much problem to solve, and I'm hopeful that the two transportation committees are gonna get closer with other pieces of the puzzle. I think this is a good time for us to shift to hearing from the tax department. Does that work for you, Rebecca? Yeah. Yes. So what I have is I have a section we still haven't heard. I have a section that Representative Odie is uncomfortable with. I have a section that Representative Higley is uncomfortable with. And we're about to hear from the tax department. Perfect.
Hi, Rebecca Samra, Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Taxes. Great to be here again. I don't have much today. I just wanted to chat about the package that we all heard about today. Great summaries from Pat and Kirby. Thanks so much. Just to mirror what you said, Representative Kornheiser, like I've been so grateful for like all parties involved, like kind of like holding the complexity also that sometimes we have expertise to weigh in on the policies that even are not our favorite ones, and just like that we can keep, a great open communication and sharing expertise like between legislative staff and our crew. It's just been really great. And I know it's been an awesome learning journey for many of us at tax who aren't like often in the weeds with corporate income and business income tax. So feel like I learned like a graduate school level, like corporate income tax class in the last couple of weeks since I've been here. So feel free to test me. I'm ready. But in general, I know that we had kind of like an evolving fiscal situation, with the estimates for what a link up would look like. And I really appreciate the committee's thoughtful approach to, like working with what we had with that really expensive link up on R&E specifically, that could really have a pretty big impact on businesses and the taxes they pay here. I think that, given that we can't afford a full link up, I think that's just like generally agreed upon. This is like a really thoughtful way to approach it. I really appreciate that there's, the carve out for small businesses is admittedly going to be like quite a lift for us to administer, but I think the policy outcome is worth that effort. And, we've already begun talking through how this will be implemented and how we can play it out in the forms. I think it will be doable. Administrative considerations are not the only considerations. And I think that's a worthwhile direction to go here, and really appreciate, keeping the research and development credit increase as well to kind of, help for like the larger businesses that are going to have to keep amortizing these expenses, as they have the last handful of years, and aren't able for Vermont tax purposes to kind of like go back to the norm of immediate expensing. I think it's really nice that the R&D credit will be there to kind of reward folks who do a lot of R&D qualifying activity here in Vermont, which is awesome and makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I think only good feedback on those fronts. Was really thoughtful policy approach. The one piece I did want to, just say something again on, I think, Will and I spoke a little bit about this when we were here early last month, but just, to the topic that Representative Odie brought up on the qualified small business stock exclusion. That's like the one policy here that does stand out to us and also to the administration is a little different, because whereas, most of the stuff we've talked about here are policies that affect, like a corporation or a business's like, broad taxable income, and then Vermont takes its little slice. this exclusion for the qualified small business stock, it's really, eliminating that exclusion is only going to affect Vermont residents. So like, these are, founders or just early investors or entrepreneurs that are, calling Vermont home now. And if they want to realize these, in the year that they realize capital gains from that, big investment they made a handful of years ago or longer, they're gonna, see a much higher tax liability because they live here in Vermont than if they lived elsewhere. So, I mean, we've talked about this in this room before, but, whereas most of the time I tend to kind of roll my eyes about the idea of someone like moving solely for tax purposes. I think that someone, even if like all their friends and loved ones were here in Vermont and they like really like their digs, like might actually change their domicile, if they're facing like a multi-million-dollar tax consequence from being here versus somewhere else. The other New England states are all conformed on this treatment. So we would stick out regionally. And just, regardless of folks like rearranging their domicile around this or not, I think it definitely lends to like optics that were not a great place for an investor. And I want to clarify that it's like, regardless if the investment, like this will affect a Vermont resident, regardless if the investment was made in a Vermont company or elsewhere. So like, acknowledging that it's not a direct impact on Vermont businesses or Vermont startups, but to the extent that there are Vermonters who, are enthusiastic about making a big investment to a local company or a corporation, that could, change the environment for those companies here too. So that's my 2 cents. And it's also, that's the one proposal as I've talked through, this package with the administration, that's the one that gave the governor pause too, not surprising based on where he stands on tax increases, that, one that just targets Vermont residents is challenging for him. So just wanted to say that on the record as you guys venture into the policy discussions.
Will you sum up your comments with how much you like the rest of the bill?
Yeah, I do. Except for this sore thumb of the qualified small business stock. I think this is a really thoughtful way to approach a very unique link up year for us. Yeah.
And then the part about the 75% tax credit is we will be like leading the nation in this. And I'm curious if the tax department has any ideas on working with the Agency of Commerce to make sure that Vermont businesses are really aware of this. It's something like, I know that tax preparers will know about it, but I know even when we moved to single sales factor, there was like Commerce didn't seem to be sharing it. And it's a real, that was a real boon for manufacturing businesses here. And so I just like, we're doing this really cool thing and I want people to know about it.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how we can be like, Vermont's moving up all those little metrics everyone's always emailing me about.
Yeah. Well, admittedly, I hadn't given that piece of the implementation rollout a lot of thought until now, but certainly the tax department would love to partner with ACCD and working on how to champion this more with their constituents. Help with messaging and things like that. I think it makes a ton of sense to celebrate if this ends up being part of our tax code. With the single sales factor, I think, it continues to, surprise me how I think we were like stuck in this three factor apportionment world for so long that, folks are still kind of like catching up with the new world. And it was, I think, an incredibly beneficial change for our local Vermont businesses and corporations, but also it was kind of like bringing Vermont to like somewhat of the status quo where other states were at. So it might have felt less celebratory as like, we made it. We're treating this stuff the way that other states treat it. But this would be, we would really be out in front on the R&D credit, which is very cool.
Thank you. Yeah. Great. Thanks, Beck. Michael, what a perfect timing of a moment you have.
Really?
I mean, there was a perfect timing, actually magically exactly at 11, but we have another, you can sit down.
Yeah.
This is actually another perfect segue moment. You can even catch your breath if you want.
I don't know what you are reviewing for purposes of.
We are talking about the miscellaneous tax bill, and I believe you we had some new language that you handed to Kirby.
Yeah.
And
21 through 23.
sections 21 through 23, and I would love for you to talk to us about those.
Okay. So you should all recall, this is Michael Grady with Legislative Council. You should recall that you had discussion about the authority of the department to establish by rule fees for the use of department lands, roads, buildings, and facilities. There was concern that the department might use that authority to establish the need for a license for persons to access department lands. And I think it also raised for you the question of whether or not you want to give the department this authority, because generally by statute, agencies are required to propose their fees to the General Assembly. And the General Assembly is supposed to set those fees, usually on a 3-year basis. Not recently, but that's what statute requires. What has come up as part of this conversation is that the department issues licenses for the use of land, and it's generally multi-year licenses for things like research, academics, use by utilities to site, say, a microwave tower on microwave relay on a fire tower. And so they are concerned that they don't lose that authority. And plus, they also set the tuition for the Green Mountain Conservation Camps. So what the language generally does is it lets the department retain license authority for multi-year licenses for research, academic, utility, etc. Lets the department set the tuition for the conservation camps, but requires the department to report back to you and re-enter the normal fee-making process for all other fees for the use of department facilities, roads, buildings, lands, etc. And it specifically prohibits the commissioner from requiring a license or permit for user access of department lands. That's generally what it does. I can walk through it specifically if you would like.
Questions? You folks want to walk through it specifically? Representative Brannigan.
Just so I understand, so that thing we were initially worried about is gone. Maybe we need a permit to go fishing or.
So you still will need your fishing license or hunting license to access department lands to engage in those activities. But just to access the land as a user, say you want to put your kayak in, or you just want to go for a walk on department lands, you won't need a license or permit to do that.
Okay. And then, Michael, again, I'm showing my age, but I thought we allowed them permanently to set that tuition rate years ago.
You did in 2006. But you were continuing that.
Yeah, okay.
So let's look at the exact language. You'll see on page, what I have is page 16. Section 21, you're in KVSA 4132, which is the general duties of the commissioner. And you can see the existing language goes on page 16 to page 17, where the commissioner has the ability to adopt and publish rules, setting fees for or charges for the use of land, roads, buildings, or other property in the use of and tuition of the Green Mountain Conservation Camps. So that first general authority, not including the tuition, was added in 2005. The tuition was added in 2006. And the fees collected under this subsection go into the Fish and Wildlife Fund, which is used to support the general activities of the department. So you would replace that authority was saying notwithstanding 32 VSA 603, that's the normal fee requirement where agencies submit to you a proposed fee and you approve it. Notwithstanding that, with the approval of the Secretary of Natural Resources, the commissioner may issue those licenses for long-term use. Those licenses are already authorized underneath the department's existing rule. So those are the licenses that have that maximum fee of $10,000. Remember the last time I was in? So they have, that would remain, that long-term license for research, academic study, commercial use, or use by regulated utilities. And the commissioner may set the tuition for the Green Mountain Conservation Camps. Page 17, line 10, the commissioner shall adopt those by rule, but the commissioner is prohibited from adopting by rule a requirement that an individual possess a license or permit in order to access lands owned or controlled by the department. Fees would still go into the Fish and Wildlife Fund. License is defined as license is defined in the current department rule as a written instrument that authorizes research, academic study, commercial use, or use by regulated utilities, but does not vest the licensee with any property rights. And then on page 18, section 22, the department's current rule, which I was misinformed when I talked to the chair recently. I said that that rule hadn't been finally approved by LCAR, but it has been finally approved by LCAR. I just went through the LCAR actions and it was approved January 29th. And it just hadn't shown up on the LCAR minutes that I had reviewed previously, but they are now, it's now there as being approved under the LCAR minutes. I think Representative Higley, I think you were the one that moved to approve it as according to the LCAR minutes.
Now, are you talking specifically about the provisions that you're looking at for that inclusion for people who use the access facilities? Because I don't remember that.
So this is, it's this rule. And the specific language of that rule.
Representative Odie, were you at Elkhart when that happened as well?
Sorry, I was just.
Trying to figure that out. Oh, no.
Go ahead.
So this rule.
Yeah.
So that rule is in place now. It would stay in place for a year. And then in July of 2027, it would be repealed. In January of 27, the department would be directed to come to you with a proposal for the fees for the use of the lands, facilities, and buildings. If this would stay in place, it would be good law. It does not require a license or permit for a general user to access department land. But then you would reinsert the department back into the normal fee-making process beginning January 15th, 2027. And that's what the language on page 18, line 6 through 13 does.
Another question. Okay, so we're putting them back into the 3-year fee process. What happens if our administration decides that they don't want to do a fee?
Oh.
Well,
Sorry. let me
their rule would repeal, and they would no longer have authority to collect fees for the use of the facilities, buildings, etc. So they would lose revenue if they did not come to you with proposed fees for you to approve.
To be fair, that makes them like every other agency.
Right.
She likes it. I understand.
Thank you. It's pretty drastic.
So those,
We used to think that at agencies.
Let's have one person speak at a time, please, everyone.
I'm done. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Absolutely. Representative Page.
yes, so those fees are for everything, or is it just for, you know, like for the fishing access and lands, things like that?
So the fees are things such as use of the Edward Keough Education Center, $300. The cabin rental, $60 a night. School use, $5 a student. weddings, $5,000. Things like that.
At a later date, the commissioner could come to this committee and request fees for the use of the fishing access or.
Yes. Yes,
Oh, for absolutely anything, yeah.
right. And it doesn't prohibit the department from proposing a user license for department lands, but the department would have to do it for you. Not by rule.
And as far as hunting licenses and fishing licenses.
Not affected. And the fees for them are already set in statute and are not set in law.
Any other questions about what happens here? Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
No, so I guess my concern now is has there been, do you know if there's gonna be any discussion with the Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife to not, go to the whole extent in the next year of creating this possible new permitting licensing fee for access to, folks that have a kayak or whatever, use these facilities?
Well, if the commissioner did, and if you pass this and the commissioner did, the commissioner would be prohibited from doing that. Because on page 17, it says the commissioner is prohibited from adopting by rule a requirement that an individual possess a license or permit in order to access lands owned or controlled by the department.
And I talked to the agency before the session started and before that rule was passed. And we've had versions of this language since pretty early in the thing. So I don't think any of it's a surprise to them.
And I have staffed the efforts to have a user license or user fee for access to access areas or even to the waters. It is not an easy subject. And I would think you as the supreme policymaker would want to be the ones that the entity that determined that.
Yeah.
Supreme policy. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, there's the policy and then there's sort of our responsibility to the institution of the legislature and the institution of democracy to make sure that the three, branches of government hold and respect each other's power. Don't. Thank you. Thank you.
The commissioner's rulemaking power is your power.
Absolutely.
You just gave it to that.
Mhm.
You can take it away.
Thank you.
It is a very tricky topic. I remember we did it.
What?
Are there any other powers?
Hard to do it twice.
Very good cook. Represented.
Quite fun. Any other powers that we've given away?
Yeah, I mean, this is one place that we delegate authority sometimes. Representative Odie.
Very tricky topic. We tried to do it 10 years ago or 8 years ago. And it's actually on a really tricky topic, easier to deal with through LCAR, just for you.
I think sometimes having a really
I'm not saying
tricky,
whether it's
I think
the way
having-
to do it.
yeah,
I'm just saying that it is smoother through LCAR.
I think that's because no one's paying any attention, to be honest with you.
And some of these-
Like, I don't mean I mean the full body is not paying attention. The people in LCAR are paying attention. I'm sorry. I didn't mean that to come out the way it did.
I didn't take.
Okay,
that at all. I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah. Representative Fulton, thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoy wherever you're going next, Michael.
That's okay. I think probably whether it's easier or not, depends where you sit. That's all I was saying.
But Ken, just further on that too, talking about LCAR. Because this is a rule that they were allowed to submit on their own without legislative approval, there isn't that look back for whether or not it meets legislative intent. So,
Oh, that's really interesting.
We always want to see if it meets legislative intent. And if we believe it does, then we have to pass it, even if we think, "Ugh," even if the LCAR members are concerned.
But you're saying in this
LCAR
case,
members
sorry.
can write a letter to the committees of jurisdiction, write letters to them, and point out that they may want to look at this again and write a law that would prevent a rule that we think that we might not prefer, or the way things are working out. Can write a new law, and be more specific, so you end up with the policy result that you prefer. But we don't get to
Well, what I
say we
heard,
don't like it, and we don't get to say that.
but what I heard Representative Higley say is that this particular rule was not set up in such a way that that LCAR even needed to check legislative intent. Is that what you're saying?
Right, because it wasn't through a bill and a
That's
law
true.
that
That's true.
the, Environment Committee passed, right? And so generally, that's the case through a rule, we will send a letter to the chair of the Environment Committee and say, does this meet legislative?
And generally, if there's rulemaking related to taxes or fees, I receive an enormous packet about it as chair. And I didn't even know about this until I read an article about it in Digger.
Well, and to be honest, and maybe I mean, Carol knows as well as I do, LCAR is pretty much, a fast moving process with, unless there's some outside intervention from somebody that really has the wherewithal to know all the ins and outs of a packet this thick. A lot of times you don't see all the ins and outs. The thing that I'm concerned with, I don't remember the conversation with Fish and Wildlife, who talked about all the fee increases for the camps and all that, ever talking about this particular fee for access to.
Oh, wow. At LCAR, you didn't even. Okay. So I think that's even more reason we should be.
Yeah.
I think Representative Fulton.
And I just want to say, you may have some sample bias because you only see what has made it through ICAR, the internal committee. And so if there are other rules that they don't want to advance related to other fees or other initiatives that they want, it never even gets to you. So it's just, I think that the healthy piece of legislative oversight is that you are forced to do that check back. Yeah.
It's only the second time I've been on for 6 years. It's only the second time that a fee has been imposed, not by us. The first time was maybe 6 or 5 years ago. And that was a great journey.
And we are going to also, I believe, receive a bill from Natural Resources about tags and jurisdiction over tags. That is much, much narrower than this. So we'll have a chance to have this conversation again. Deer tags, yeah. Because they added a new tag this year and did not, and it was a free tag because they actually did not have authority to charge a fee for it without talking to us.
Oh,
But and just respectfully, there's lots of ways that the rules processes have implications that are financial implications that don't involve fees.
That's true.
And I'm just saying that there's a lot that happens outside the legislative process that has an impact on the bottom line.
That's true.
And it's bipartisan.
Although we're always asked, every rule, it always says, what's the economic impact? And what's the impact on schools? What's the impact on the environment? There's a list of questions.
That's Melanie.
I know, I'm not arguing on it.
And it's bipartisan, both.
We have Chris here. The fiscal note's not going to be ready for this bill till tomorrow. Tomorrow. Okay, great. So what we're doing for what I see as next steps for this is people are going to do some thinking about everything, but I imagine extra thinking on the conformity issues. And we'll have an opportunity to talk about that again after lunch. And then tomorrow morning again, and then planning to vote tomorrow afternoon. I'm going to hang out here if anyone wants to talk about any of it. And then we are back here at 1:15. Amy Spear from the Chamber has been, and the Accountants Association, is that what they're called? CPA Society, thank you. Have both been really involved in this process and working with tax and JFO and me to, and they're sort of around the building. And I think Amy will be back here later if anyone wants to talk to her about the Chamber's perspective on the bill as well. So with that, see you after lunch.